Hello friends, it is I once more, OmnusI, here in my lair to answer another question for the RPG Brigade as part of the RPG A Day challenge. Today's challenge, day 15, the 15th of August, describe a tricky role-playing game experience that you enjoyed. Gladly. But this one's going to require a little bit of backstory, so if you already know this, feel free to just do something else for a second. The company Fantasy Flight Games got the right to create role-playing games for a franchise called Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer 40,000 started out as a tabletop war game set in the far distant future where humanity has an empire that spreads across over 1 million planets. But unfortunately, there's a lot of aliens and people who don't think humanity should be ruling the galaxy, and so there's constant fighting. Alongside of humanity, they've created genetically modified humans called Space Marines, which if you ever hear of Warhammer 40,000, you'll see the Space Marines mostly. They're gigantic, they wear power armor with huge pauldrons and big, huge, oversized, ugly weaponry, and it's kind of glorious. The tabletop game, the war game, is a bit on the expensive side to get all the official pieces and everything. So, and I don't have the patience for hours and hours of tabletop war gaming. I like the role play. So, but Fantasy Flight Games got to spin off that experience into a role playing game, and they did that with a series of different role playing games. So what I did was, there was a game where you were able to play as these superhuman soldiers called Death Watch. And your characters come from a wide variety of different chapters or families of these Space Marines, so that you can have different idiosyncrasies for your Space Marine as compared to all the other powered, armored warrior monks of the Imperium. And together you work to fight against the aliens that are trying to destroy humanity. And so we started a game of that. I began running it. And then I felt it just wasn't there. It wasn't honestly, it wasn't dark enough. I had a storyline that was very deviant from the actual storyline of the history of the game, because I had at least one player who knew the game inside and out from the war game side. And he knew all the history and everything, and I wanted to throw a wrench into the work so that he couldn't predict, what the storyline was going to end up being. And it's a very different idea, and if anybody wants to hear it, just let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll elaborate on that. But let's just say that it wouldn't be accepted by the greater majority of Warhammer fans. It's more like a personal fan fiction or something like that. But it was enough of a deviant history that the players went into it without any knowledge that anything was up. And then I got wind of another one of the lines called Only War, where instead of playing the superhuman soldiers, you played the frontline grunts that are in the billion-strong Imperial Guard, which are the rank-and-file soldiers who defend the Imperium when the Space Marines aren't around. And they number in the billions. Their strategy is kind of like Russia in World War II, just to bury the enemy in your dead and then, leave nothing behind if they're going to win. Make sure that their victory costs them more. And they have, cool weapons and things like that. But I thought, when I heard about the game, that I thought it had potential in role-playing, in a way sort of like the old TV show MASH, where even though these characters are stuck in a war zone, and they could very easily die, the situation is very grim, the characters could develop, and in the crucible of the fight, their characters could develop and grow personalities, and the interplay of their personalities could lead to some entertaining role-play. So I also told them at the same time we were going to run, I just wrapped up another because I run two counterpoint role-playing games that we meet for every other week. So Warhammer one week, and like now it's D&D the other. So we switch off. I'm still running both games, but we do different things so I don't get bored with one storyline, and it's kind of something we've just kind of held to. Also because sometimes one person can only show up to every other. That's how it goes. So anyhow, so they started up an Only War campaign on the opposing weekends. And I had a lot of fun coming up with grim ways to kind of show them how the world is really blunt and their lives mean nothing to their commanders. They exist only as a means to an end, and it's up to them to try to make something of it. They created their own planet and attitude. They came from the planet Machiavelli, and their personalities were scroungers. They would take anything that was not nailed down. And if there was nailed down, they had crowbars, so they didn't mind that. It was a fun group. But anyhow, why I did this? Two reasons. Number one, I thought it was good for roleplay. Number two, I intended it to be a short campaign because I wanted to bring this game in as a counterpoint to the Death Watch game. The Death Watch game was a little stale because these characters are hard to get into the mindset of. Because we have not been hypno-indoctrinated over over a decade of training and personal grafts and education and re-education into this society. So playing the characters as the lore would dictate they act is tough. Certainly my players were struggling. They were just playing guys in armor with big guns. So I wanted to impress on them just how grim things could get. So I had this world, I think it was called Moloch, and both groups ended up at this place. The Space Marines were sent to crash in, kill some orcs who were threatening to overrun the planet, cripple the orc advance, and then they could get out and let the guard take care of things. The guardsmen were trying to survive. They were in some heavy action, including vehicle combat, and the orcs are tough. Fortunately, the guard had some pretty good weapons, and the group was doing, pretty well for themselves. They thought they were doing fine. But then they got summoned to this hive, which was a hive in Warhammer 40k is a city, but it dwarfs any city we have on Earth. Over 1 billion people can live in one of these, and oftentimes they are stacked up layer on layer and surrounded by thick walls, because those planets that have hives usually devastate the surrounding environment, so they need the walls to keep themselves alive, or they can put them on inhospitable worlds and things like that. The hives are a great resource for the Imperium because it generates people. As much as anything else, they use whatever they use that labor for, it makes more people, so more fighters, more people that they can bring to other worlds to be serfs for labor, or what have you. But mostly soldiers for defending the Imperium. So they both ended up in this place, and there was an outbreak of chaos, which is the dark side of humanity, and it's a viable, palpable force in this universe. Cultists of this chaos can tap into great power, but they risk losing their humanity and turning into unnameable blobs of goo and such. So demons can come from this chaos, and they oftentimes are quite vividly portrayed as in the tabletop game and the war game, as well as the role-playing game. They're a scary, scary foe. The Death Watch, not as much. Again, these Space Marines are special. They're superhuman. But they're still nasty opponents. So at any rate, the Space Marines had their orders. Through a weird twist of fate, partially DM fiat for the story, but the Only War soldiers got into a rocket and were launched into the city, where everything was just going haywire in the city. The Space Marines were trying to control things, but this outbreak was getting to be too much. It wasn't so much the orcs from outside anymore. It was clear this is a full chaos problem. The humans found their way up onto the command deck, where all the security of the place was arrayed, and they helped the Space Marines penetrate in so that they could work on their objective, which was taking out the governor of the planet, who was corrupt. They were going to excise the corruption at the core. So the soldiers were supposed to go in, they were supposed to shut everything down, and then a little bit like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars Episode 4, turn off security and then meet his demise at the hands of the enemy. That's how it was supposed to go. It was supposed to drive in how grim this world is. And no matter how flourishing these characters seemed to be, the odds were stacked against them and somebody was going to die. To that end, they were pitted up against Chaos Space Marines, who are very nasty, just as nasty as their Death Watch opposites, and against normal human soldiers. Shouldn't have stood a chance. Shouldn't have stood a chance. But just like any game that has any kind of a chance of a critical hit, the players got insanely lucky. So they took out a chaplain of the Wordbearer Traitor Legion, Chaos Space Marine, and a nasty one too, who taunted them the whole while until their operator, the least skilled fighter of all, took a screwdriver and he jammed it in his power supply and found just the perfect spot to shut down his power armor so that he was basically trapped inside of his own armor. Technically a pretty genius move, he just stumbled on it. So he was held still, and I believe he tried fighting back feebly, but the guys were able to, pin a couple of grenades to him, and well, I couldn't let it sit on that. So his death manifested a proper demon. This is one of those things that they should never have survived. It was a bloodthirster, nasty demon. Capable of shredding a Space Marine, certainly. Really, really, really skilled Space Marines, the upper echelon, might be able to take one of these on. But, yeah, these are 5 normal human schmucks and their backup, their comrades. This should have been open and shut. Remember what I said about critical hits? Same operator, same bloody screwdriver. There's something called Righteous Fury. If you hit and you roll a critical hit, that is, you roll maximum damage on the weapon. You can make a test against your skill. If you succeed, you can re-roll that die and add that number to the 10. And if you roll another 10, 6 10s were rolled in a row, and I'm not exaggerating. He snuffed out the bloodthirster. It took some minor damage from the others to start the fight, and he finished it. It was ridiculous. But I was still determined that I was going to tell my story. So they heard that an orbital strike was going to be launched on that spot, just to be sure. It's not really overkill if there's even scorch marks left, right? Well, they reached out to a powerful NPC who was in the area, the crux of the storyline and the twist of the story as I made it for that game. And I thought about it, I'm like, it really would be a fuss for him to get them out of that. He had the potential. It just would have been a fuss because of all the other stuff that was going on. Because while all this was happening on this world that was getting destroyed, ultimately, he swooped in and saved a lot of the people and Imperial Guard of the world under the nose of the Imperium. But what was his chances of actually just, beaming them out of that mess? Well, they prevailed upon me. So I made some course corrections. Instead of making it this huge pit of drama and killing off characters that they really had gotten attached to, Really, they had some of their. They had really strong personalities. They had a lot of fun with these characters. I twisted my own game on a dime. I basically had them be rescued because the important entity was impressed by their moxie of being able to survive what they had. Figured with that kind of experience, he could work with that. So instead, I had them be the harbingers of what was going on behind the scenes with these characters when the Space Marines weren't paying attention, and they had their own things that they were taking care of, which led to the story playing out as it did, and me telling an entire alternate storyline to the Warhammer universe. Basically, it was pretty all-encompassing. So that, I really enjoyed it. The players really liked it. They really loved their characters. Ironically enough, it wasn't the big hulking Space Marines that most of them ended up loving more. It was those characters that, struggled and survived. And I think I may have done them a disservice for not continuing in that only war mode, because I think that's really what built up their characters. And after that, they kind of coasted off a little bit, even though they did wonderful things and told great stories. It's definitely a universe I intend to go back to at some point, or another fraction of that universe, because I am running another Warhammer 40,000 game now. It's just, different story and different things. So, but that is a tricky experience, treading along what my players like, what they would enjoy, what would tell the story that I wanted to tell, and ultimately allowing my story to change. That word player agency may get knocked around a little bit, but I let the players prevail upon me to input into the story and tell a story for all of us, not just me, and it worked out pretty darn well. So, that's my story. I am OmnusI, here once more for RPG A Day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please share, like, subscribe, share with your friends. I have lots of stories. So, thank you once more, and until next time, I am OmnusI saying I wish you many successful and profitable adventures, and farewell.